Does your house look like this? Or maybe it's just a little bit updated, more like this one. Before you sell your house to an investor, you need to stop and watch this video first. I work with a lot of sellers here in the West Valley in cities like, Glendale, Maryville, Tolleson. And I see people that have outdated homes or homes that need some major repairs, and they leave thousands of dollars on the table because they work with investors directly. Hey, what's up guys? Juan Ramirez, I'm a Juan Realtor here in Arizona, serving Central Phoenix and West Valley cities. And if you want real talk and no fluff and videos that would actually help you make good decisions in this market, please hit subscribe. Because today we're gonna be diving into something that affects a lot of homeowners here in the West Valley. Homeowners that feel overwhelmed, stuck, or just frustrated. Now, a couple years ago, I had a client that was about to take an offer from an investor. They went to the house and said, hey, you know what? I can buy a house for $200,000. But he was just a little curious and see what else could he get. So he called me and said, hey, look, I'm thinking about selling my house. I got this great offer. My house needs quite a bit of work. So I'm just not sure if I could get any more or, if there's anything else that could be done. So I said, all right, cool, let's meet. Let me go to your house, check it out, and tell you what I can do. So I went to his house, and his house actually was pretty nice. It was a little outdated, right? It had some old carpet, a little dirty. The yard wasn't that nice. He was just dirt. But his house was worth a lot more than $200,000. Obviously, these guys were trying to make a profit and invest, make it look super nice, but they were gonna make a lot more money than, and my client was gonna leave some money on the table. So I did a net sheet, which is what shows how much somebody's gonna profit after you sell the house, after fees, closing costs, commissions. So after we looked at all the numbers, he was gonna make around $65,000 more by selling, putting it in the market and creating competition. So we put on the market. The first week we had a bunch of offers. One of them was a cash buyer that was moving from California, and we closed on the deal, and he made that extra $65,000. Now that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to help people make the smart decision. If you want to sell the house and not have to deal with the stress, I understand. But you have to make an educated decision by knowing all the information. And that's what I'm trying to do in this video. Now, before we talk about what are the options you have, I want to talk about investors or the different type of investors we have out there, because they're not all built the same. They don't all focus on the same. Some of them, they'll take whatever property. Other homes have a specific buy box where they're only going to buy houses in certain conditions. For example, like some of these big buyers, they won't buy certain manufactured homes. They won't buy houses with some crazy additions or some major repairs. So knowing this information, it'll help you decide who you can work with and what to look out for. All right, so first we're gonna talk about the big guys, the iBuyers. And this is, OfferPad, Open Door, Zillow offers is out. They've been out for a couple of years. They packed and left, and they're still in the industry. They just don't deal with fix and flips because they lost a lot of money. Now, again, these guys buy houses that are habitable or in decent condition. All right, so we're gonna talk about the pros and the cons for these buyers. And first, let's start with pros. You have flexible closing dates. You can change it up, you can extend it, you can do a fast closing. And that's the other pro, that you can do very fast closings. They ask for no repairs, they do no showings, the offer is cash, and they give you that convenience. All right, so now we're gonna talk about the cons. And the cons for these guys are that your offer is normally gonna be anywhere between 10 to 20% under market value. Now, that's not the only thing. On top of that, you're gonna have a 5% service fee. I know these guys used to promote that they don't have any realtor fees or any kind of fees. They have a 5% service fee. Now, after they do their inspection, normally they come back with a list of items that need to be fixed. They don't ask you to fix them, but they'll come back with a budget. They'll say, to repair these things, we need $10,000 in credits to be able to buy your house. And that's gonna be discounted from your overall proceeds. The other ones that you still pay seller closing costs. And also, they don't just buy any properties. If your property is in pretty bad condition, they're not gonna buy and give you this kind of offer. So in most cases, sellers end up selling their home to these guys, end up with 15 to 25% below market value. Now, back in 2020 to 2022, these guys were making some crazy offers. A lot of times they were actually paying more than what the market was willing to pay for your house. I saw it all the time. Now, they did have billions of dollars in losses because they were following their algorithm, which wasn't correct. That's one of the reasons why Zillow got out. I would see houses that they would buy for $400,000 end up selling for $360 just because they kept having to drop the price because it wasn't selling. I don't know where they got these numbers. It was crazy, but they don't do that anymore. Their offers are coming in much lower and a lot more conservative than they were back then. All right, so the next one is hedge funds and private equity buyers. Now, these guys are the other big guys on the block. They're not as big as iBuyers, but they are pretty big. And when I'm talking about Progress Residential, Invitation Homes, American Homes for Rent, Tricon Residential. Back in 2020 to 2022, these guys were buying one out of every fourth listing here in Arizona. I remember I looked at my numbers and they did buy 25% of my listings. I actually ended up selling my house to these guys because they were the best offer. I had to sell my house 4 years ago and put it out on the market and ended up getting an offer from them. The offer I had from a regular buyer was like 20 grand less. So it just made sense to sell these guys. It was a cash offer. It was a fast closing. They asked for a couple of repairs or a couple credits, but it wasn't too crazy. And it just made total sense. These guys are normally buying homes to rent them out. So that's why they're able and willing to pay more than what the house is worth or what other people were willing to pay. But since then, they've back off the market a little bit. And actually, I'm seeing a lot of them unload some of the inventory they have by selling it back into the market, especially in cities like Phoenix, Arizona. I mean, they've bought all throughout the United States, but here in Phoenix, they bought so many because rents were going up so fast. But now that rents are going down, they've slowed down. They actually stopped doing a lot of their purchases here. All right, so now we're gonna talk about pros and cons. Pros for these guys is that they're, cash offers. They ask for no repairs, flexible closing, and often they're very strong, and the chances of closing with these guys is pretty high. Cons, well, they're really rarely buying this year, and last year they really didn't buy much in 2024. They focus on MLS listings. They want to work with another realtor, so it's not like you can go to their website and see if they want to buy your house. And that means that you're still going to be paying buyer and seller side commissions most of the time with these guys. Now, they do avoid major repairs, like if your house has a roof that is falling off, or fire damage, foundation issues, they could reject your property. Their buying box is a little bit bigger than the iBuyers, but it's not much bigger. Now, chances are you're not going to be working with these guys because they're really not buying, like I said, but it's good to know so that if they come back here in the next couple of years, you at least know what to do. All right, so the next on the list is fix and flip buyers. Now, these are the I buy your house cash type of buyers. All right, so what these guys are looking for are things like hoarder homes, fire damaged homes, major repairs needed, like, a bad roof, bad foundation, things like that. So for example, a lot of these guys are buying your house at a 60 to 70% ARV, and the way the market's going right now, it's probably gonna be closer to 60%. What does ARV mean? ARV is after repair value. So for example, let's say your house currently is outdated and ugly and it's worth around $350, but after you make some upgrades or you remodel it, it might be worth $400,000. So the ARV is $400,000. Now let's talk about the pros and cons. Pros is that they pretty much buy anything. Now, not every single fix and flip buyer, they're not all the same. Some of them focus on other things. So for example, some of them might just do, roof issues because they have a roofing company that they also own. So they're willing to do any kind of roof issue, but they won't do plumbing issues. Now, some other investors might do it all because they have experience doing foundation, plumbing issues, and roof issues. So it just varies, but most of the time you're gonna find somebody's gonna be willing to buy your house in whatever condition it's in. They have fast cash closings. They don't do showings. They provide flexible closings. And again, they don't request any repairs. Now the cons is that their offer is gonna be way below the current value. So again, you're gonna be around 60% ARV. Sometimes they end up not closing. So if you don't get an experienced investor and they go through an inspection, they might end up backing out and say, hey, you know what, I can't do this house. So you're gonna be left with having to figure out what to do if you're already looking for the next place you were buying or you were moving to. They use their own contracts too. So for example, if you go directly with them, they're not gonna use the AR/MLS contracts, which has a lot of stipulations that will protect both parties. They will use their own contracts, and most of the time it's only protecting them. They're not really regulated. That's another one. They're not regulated by the state. I mean, there's kind of the wild, wild west. I know things have changed and there's been new laws implemented to try to regulate them a little bit more, but overall, they're not really regulated. And sometimes you will deal with somebody that says that they're the end buyer and they're misleading you, and they're not really the end buyer. They're just gonna sell the contract to somebody else. And right now, I'm gonna talk about what that means. All right, so the next one is wholesalers. Now, this is where things get interesting. A lot of people don't really know what this means or how do they work. But basically what they're doing is that they're marketing your property and they're gonna sell your contract for whatever you've negotiated, and they're gonna sell it at a higher price to make that profit. So in reality, they're not really buying your house. They're not gonna fix it. They're just negotiating a deal and then selling it over. Now let's talk about the pros and cons. The pros is that normally have a big network of investors. So for example, going back to the same situation where I said, not every investor might be willing to buy your house if you have some major issues, things that are a little bit rare. Like I said, maybe they have to, start digging under the house because there's major plumbing issues. Not every investor is going to be open to that, but there might be an investor that owns a plumbing company or has experience in that might be open to that. So a good wholesaler will know which investors to market the house to, and they can get the deal closed where you might not be able to find these investors that easily to be able to find which one's willing to buy your house. They move deals fast. They're cash buyers and they won't request any repairs. Those are all pros. Now the cons is that they're not very transparent. Again, sometimes you might think they're the end buyer and they're really not. And you might see them walking through your house and you're like, why are you, they might stop by with the other end buyer or other wholesaler to show them the house. And you're like, why are you showing my house? Like, what's going on? I've seen some crazy situations. Their contracts is mostly set up to protect them. They won't use the ARMLS as well. And a lot of times when you read it, it basically says that they're going to be marketing your property. It doesn't say that they're going to be buying your property. I mean, if you got to pay attention to what what the contract says, but it's a little misleading. Now, if they cannot find an end buyer, or they maybe went a little bit over their heads and thought that they can find somebody for your house, or they offered you too much, they will cancel. And again, sometimes they'll leave you hanging. Now you're ready to move to the next house or the next apartment, or you're leaving the state and thinking that your house is sold, and all of a sudden they cancel last minute. Another thing is that they can create as many assignments as they want. So let's say, for example, one investor gets you to accept $200,000 offer, but there's quite a bit of meat on the bones. So they might sell that contract for $250,000 to the next investor. Maybe that investor might say, you know what, I'm going to sell it to another investor I know that really wants to deal with this, and I'm going to sell it for $280. So now there's one of them making 50, the other one making 30, and there's still enough for the next investor, and you just missed out on all that profit. Now, don't get me wrong, some wholesalers are great. I've worked with a couple that are amazing, great people, very honest, but there's a lot of shady people out there, so you just have to be very careful. All right, so first we're going to talk about who should not be selling their house to an investor and what are some of the options you have. All right, so number one on the list is homeowners with outdated homes. Maybe you have a 1980s kitchen, you have an outdated carpet, crazy looking wallpaper. It might look like Married with Children, like Al Bundy's gonna pop up in the living room and chill watching TV. I don't know. It's just, there's so many houses that haven't been touched in years and they still look the same. And that's fine, but you might think that your house is not gonna sell for top dollar just because it's completely outdated. And let's say you end up calling an investor just because you think, nobody's gonna wanna buy my house. They go to your house and they see that they can make a good profit and they have no competition. They're gonna give you whatever offer, whatever profit they wanna make. And I've seen some of these guys make tons of money in just one house. And that's because the seller left a lot of money on the table. Now, what's a better option than selling to an investor? Well, the better option is to work with a realtor that's gonna market your house. It's gonna market to DIY buyers, to cash buyers, not necessarily investors. These could just be people that sold their house for cash and now they're moving to, Arizona. Buyers on a budget. What does that mean? Buyers on a budget is, so let's say, for example, they want to be in a specific neighborhood, but they only qualify for $360,000. And majority of homes in that neighborhood are selling for $400,000. So let's say your house is outdated. It's not going to sell for $400,000, but let's say you list it at $360,000. This budget buyer that says, hey, I only have this budget and I want to be in this neighborhood, I'm willing to buy this house and fix it up little by little. So they put an offer, and most of the time these people are very grateful that they can get into that neighborhood. They're very happy, so things go up pretty smooth. So the goal is to create competition, basically. Get all these people in your house and try to see who's going to give you the best offer. All right, the next one is sellers that do not want to deal with the stress of a traditional sale. Look, I get it. Having people go through your house at random times. Let's say you're about to have dinner with your family. All of a sudden you get a request that they want to show your house. Maybe you have little ones and you have to keep your house clean all the time. Maybe you have pets. You don't want to keep them in the kennel all day so that your house can be shown. I get it. It's not very easy. It's very stressful. And on top of that, you have to deal with figuring out how you're going to move everything you have in your house to the next house. Now, what's a better option than having to sell with an investor? The option is that you should list your house 5% below market value and then choose a day. Most of the time is on the weekend, so we can do an open house. And that's the only day we're going to show it. What does this do? It creates scarcity. It creates competition. It creates social proof, because it shows that people want to buy your house. And then there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be putting offers. And I would only work with conventional and potentially cash offers. And when you're negotiating the deal, you negotiate it that the house is going to sell as is. I actually had a client in that situation like a year ago. He said, look, I want to sell my house. I just had a baby. I have a little one. My wife works from home. I don't want to deal with having people come to my house and my wife needs to, leave work or take the kids out, keep the house clean. And I just don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with the stress. So I want to sell it to maybe, Open Door, OfferPad, or one of these guys. So I said, all right, well, before you do that, let's do this. Let me show you my plan. We can sell your house and not have to deal with all that stress. And then I'm gonna request a offer from these guys and see how does it compare and if it makes sense. So I requested an offer from Open Door and OfferPad, and then I created a net sheet. A net sheet will give you a breakdown of all your fees and your potential profit. So after I gave him both, he was gonna make a difference of I believe it was $80,000 difference, just because he didn't want to show it all throughout the week. And his house was beautiful. He had a beautiful yard. His house was nice inside, amazing kitchen. So it was gonna sell pretty quickly. But if you price it a little bit below market, you're still gonna net a lot more than if you try to go the easy route with a cash buyer. All right, the next ones are houses that have been rejected by FHA. Now, what does that mean? FHA is pretty strict when it comes to the rules. So, for example, if the house has certain things that they deemed, a risk. So for example, like if the house was built pre-1978 and there's paint that is chipping off. I've had appraisers that request the whole house to be painted. And we talk about thousands of dollars. Some sellers might not have that kind of budget. Or let's say that they see something wrong with the roof and now they're requesting for an engineer certification and they're requesting for major repairs, and that could be another couple thousands of dollars. And you just don't have that budget. So you say, hey, you know what? Let me just get a cash offer. I just don't want to deal with this anymore. But what's a better option? A better option is to get a realtor that is going to market your house the right way, that's going to target conventional buyers, cash buyers, and also handy buyers. And what does that mean? I mean, just because FHA rejected your house, or maybe you feel like it's going to get rejected because of certain things that are wrong with your house, it doesn't mean that we cannot find some kind of creative solutions. So let me tell you a story. I had a client that when we did the when we did the listing presentation, he said, look, I have a room that it's one of the bedrooms. We took out the carpet, but we just don't have the money to put a new carpet back in or put tile. And I was told that FHA wouldn't approve it. I said, yeah, that's true, but hey, we can look at other options. Let's not disqualify FHA buyers and not market it like it's only focused on cash and conventional. So let's market it to everyone. So we actually had somebody came in, we had an open house. We had a bunch of people come in, and we had not a cash buyer, an FHA buyer came in and said, hey, look, I'll offer you X amount, which was around 20,000 more than all the other offers. He said, I really want this house, but I have to do FHA because of my situation, but I do carpet and I'll come in at my own expense and fix that carpet so that it goes through the appraisal. Can we make that work? So I worked with this realtor, we figured out the details, we made it work. And a couple weeks later, we closed the deal and my client made an extra 20,000 when he thought we were only going to market to conventional and cash buyers. There's nothing you can't fix with creating a little bit of competition, right? All right, so how much money can you lose really by selling to an investor? And I know I've already given you a couple numbers, but I didn't really compare both scenarios. So let me give you a scenario that'll make a little bit more sense. So let's say you have a house that has an ARV of 400,000. Okay, that means that if your house was to be remodeled and you did all the repairs, it would be worth 400,000. So you get an investor walk into your house and says, hey, look, I'll buy your house. And then he starts doing calculations. He's not going to tell you house could be worth 400,000, right? But he says, okay, so it could be worth 400,000. I want to make 60,000 on this house to take on this risk. I know there's going to be around $60,000 worth of repairs. That's already 120. And then you start thinking about all the costs, the holding costs, and that's like your interest, closing costs, and commissions. So now you're adding another 40,000. Now we're talking about 160,000. So your final offer you're going to get is going to be 240,000. Okay. That's going to be from a cash buyer. That's how much you're going to net, 240,000. Now, for somebody that bought their house in 2010, 2012 for 60,000, 80,000, 200,000 might seem, or 240,000 might seem like a lot of money. But let's look at the numbers and compare them. So let's say, same scenario, ARV's 400,000, but let's say your house is outdated, right? You have ugly carpet, kitchen's outdated, but it's nice, it's livable. Like you don't need to tear it down, or it's not like full infested with mold or anything like that. So let's say your house, you can sell it. A lot of the houses similar to yours are selling for 360,000. That's the current value. But we obviously want to go a little bit below that to create a little bit more competition and to make your house the smartest decision for a buyer that is looking in the area. Like we want your house to be the smartest choice, right? So let's say we price it 5% below market. Current value is 342,000. So let's say it sells for that price. And there's obviously still going to be commissions, closing costs. So let's subtract another 7% when it comes to that. So you're going to net around 318,000 with $60. So if you compare that to 240,000 that you would get from the investor, you could be making an extra $78,060. Or I guess you could look at it, you could have lost $78,060 if you would have sold to the investor. So that's kind of how you could look at those numbers. And again, if you just market your house the right way and you price it right, I mean, you can eliminate a lot of these problems. All right, so now we got to talk about who probably should sell to an investor and what options you have, right? So somebody with a hoarder home, I don't have to say much when it comes to that. I mean, it's just not a lot of people are going to be enticed to want to put an offer on a house like that. I mean, a lot of times it could be thousands of dollars to clean up a house like that. And then there's going to be surprises under all that trash. Could be a couple bodies, could be infestation of rats, there could be some mold. You just don't know. Or there could be maybe some plumbing issues that created some other structural issues. I mean, there's just so many things that could come from that. So what's an option for a person in that situation? So I would say call 2 to 3 local investors that focus on hoarder homes and have them come into your house at the same time. So it creates a little bit of competition and you get the best offer possible. Now, if you don't want to deal with all that, I personally wouldn't recommend it. I would work with somebody, a realtor, that has the experience of working with investors and can, make sure they market the house to all the investors, that they price it right from the get-go, creating that competition, and go from there. Now, what I would recommend is to work with a realtor that has experience working with investors, that can price your house right, market it, and have them all come in at the same time, creating that competition. And then that way you can get protected, because a realtor is going to know what to look out for and how to structure the offer to make sure you are protected. All right, the next one on the list is heavily damaged homes. So let's say you had a fire damage, or let's say you had a major roof issue and it created mold throughout the house, or maybe your AC doesn't work and it's almost going to be the summer, you just don't have the money to fix it. A lot of these issues are issues that a lot of lenders are not going to finance. So your only option is going to be somebody either buying cash, and most people that are buying cash that are not investors, they don't want something that messed up. So your option is going to be investors. Now, what are your options? Same as a hoarder, I would get a couple investors to go to your house and give you the best option. The thing is that sometimes it's time consuming to be calling investors and having them stop by your house. But if you have the time, then I will call a bunch of them and have them go to your house at the same time. Otherwise, work with a realtor that can do all that, and they most of the time have a list of investors that they can work with. Now, the last one I would say is a little bit debatable is sellers that don't want to deal with the stress of a traditional sale, and they are okay with losing money or leaving money on the table, I guess you could say. I met a lot of people that value convenience over profit. They're okay with leaving some money on the table. They just don't want to deal with the stress. And there could be different reasons for that. But most of the time, there's still better options. What are the options? I would say, I would still work with the realtor, because if your house is in great shape, you just don't want to deal with the stress, you can still sell your house stress-free while still generating the most amount of profit as possible. You might not generate the most amount of money as somebody that might be willing to show their house at different times and keep it clean and do all these other things. But if you're willing to work with a realtor, price it right, create competition, and only show it on a specific house, and you're open to at least one day out of the week, then you can still sell it for a top dollar rather than going the realtor route. But again, you're still showing it for one day. So if you don't even want to do that, then I would say an investor would be a great option. All right, so if you're in Central Phoenix or any of the West Valley, like again, Glendale, Tolleson, Avondale, Goodyear, I go as far as Tonopah all the time. But if your house needs some repairs, or it's a little outdated and you're thinking about selling and you want to look at all your options, you can click on the link below, schedule a Zoom call. We can meet in person. I can go to your house, whatever works best. So you can look at every single option you have to make sure you don't leave money on the table and make some of these really bad, costly decisions. All right, guys, this is Juan Ramirez, number one realtor here in Arizona. I'll see you on the next one.